Hey guys, DJ here at Top Tech Cards and Games, and in this video I'm going to talk about Yuya Watanabe's Jeskai token decks that he played at the World Championship, and a lot of people have picked up ever since. It's one of my favorite decks in the format, and normally for deck videos I like to kind of make my own brew or at least tweak a existing list and talk about it. But this deck is so close to like the perfect list for it, and there's so few changes that I would even consider making, that I really just wanted to talk about his list, talk about what it does, and talk about why I think it's one of the best decks in the format. First, we'll just look at the creatures. There's 4 Seeker of the Way and 4 Goblin Rabble-Masters. That doesn't seem like a lot of creatures until you count the token-producing cards, the Hordling Outburst, and the Raise the Alarms. But as far as just the actual creatures go, Rabble-Master is an absolute staple. It's one of the strongest cards in the format. The synergy with Hordling Outburst and several other cards in the list is just insane. Seeker of the Way, I think, is the weakest card in the deck. Maybe the second weakest. You definitely need to play it, but I don't know if 4 copies is necessary. One of the only cards I would consider dropping is a Seeker of the Way. But what Seeker does offer the deck is a lot of explosiveness when comboed with Jeskai Ascendancy, since you're getting basically 2 Prowess triggers for every spell you play. So you can, shoot a burn spell at their face, suddenly Seeker's a 4/4. Play another spell, suddenly it's a 6/6. And you can just quickly end the game with plays like that in a lot of sequences. So Seeker is very strong in the deck. The lifelink also helps you really beat aggro decks, which this deck is already very strong against. For the token producers, you max out on Hordling Outburst and Raise the Alarm. Hordling Outburst is just one of the best cards in the format when played with Goblin Rabble-Master. The burst you can produce is insane. It's a very predictable line of play, very easy to play around. You just kill the Rabble-Master and you take half the damage away, probably more than half. But it's so strong that your opponent has to respect it, and Hordling Outburst on its own is very good. Then when given the utility that this deck has with Jeskai Ascendancy and Jeskai Charm, it's just one of the strongest cards in the format. Raise the Alarm is instant speed, which makes it really strong, especially against the aggro decks that play a lot of X1 creatures. And the fact that these are both, spells rather than actual creatures really helps your deck because you're playing Jeskai Ascendancy and have these Prowess triggers. So it lets you get through your deck very quickly using the Ascendancy. Then we go on to the spells. There's some burn/removal, plus a little bit of card draw down here. You have 4 Stoke the Flame, which I think is actually the strongest card in the deck. In conjunction with Jeskai Ascendancy, it's basically a free spell. Since you tap your creatures, Ascendancy just untaps them, you give them all +1, and then you get to loot. So you're basically playing 0 mana, 4 damage, loot a card, plus your board gets +1/+1, which is just actually insane. Like, I can't think of many cards that are even close to that power level. Obviously, there's a lot of conditions you have to meet first. You have to have 4 dudes, you have to have Jeskai Ascendancy, but basically that's what this deck aims to assemble. And once you have it on board, playing this for free is just crushing. Like, that's one of the best interactions in the format, I think. And one of the reasons I think this deck is so strong is how well it plays Stoke the Flames. Because a 4 damage burn spell, is already insane. And when you're playing it for free, that's incredible. Like, there's just not better stuff you can do, really, in Standard right now. Then we have 4 Lightning Strikes. It's just generic 3 damage removal/kill spell, or burn spell, which is, fine. It's not the best card, not the worst card. It's pretty necessary, though, since you're playing these colors. You don't have much better removal. It isn't instant. Then we have 2 Jeskai Charm. Jeskai Charm is a really strong card in the deck. It's one thing I could see playing an extra copy of, but the 4 damage effect is insane always. The put a creature on top effect is always very good, but this deck takes incredibly strong advantage of the give my team +1 and lifelink ability. When you have like 5 tokens in play, like that's already, +5 damage and lifelink. Like, instead of swinging for 5, you're swinging for 10. If you have Jeskai Ascendancy in play, suddenly you're swinging for 15 instead of 5. Which is just so much. And even if a lot of those swing into blockers, you gain all that life. This makes it almost impossible to lose to aggro when you have this in Seeker of the Way just gaining your life. Plus, an incredible amount of blockers from your tokens. So, this card really, really shores up a lot of matchups. Against decks that are a little bigger than you, being able to put like a dirtily threat on top of their library and swing in is incredible. And against the really slow decks, the 4 mana burn, or 4 damage burn, is just incredible. Chandra is the other questionable card in the list, I think. Normally in here you use her to make it so something big can't block, basically whatever creature your opponent has that could block Rabble-Master. Sometimes you use her for gas, but the main use I've found is, get a blocker off the field. Sometimes you even can just kill X1, which is pretty big in the format right now. There are a lot of X1 creatures. I think Chandra is the second weakest card in the deck, though, after Seeker. Could definitely see cutting her altogether or dropping a copy, but the card is very good for keeping your Rabble-Master attack safe. Treasure Cruise is the reason I love this deck so much. I think Treasure Cruise is just the best thing you can be playing in general, and no deck takes better advantage of it in Standard than this one. And that's because of the Ascendancy, which is just insane in this deck. We've seen Jeskai Ascendancy basically do everything. It's, you know, and here it does literally it all. It makes your creatures bigger. It acts as, you know, a fancy Glorious Anthem. It acts as a loot spell to fuel our Treasure Cruises or just find our gas. And it untaps our guys to block with them again, which makes our deck so multifaceted against aggro decks that it's just hard to lose. Because of Ascendancy, though, and this pile of spells, specifically our creatures basically being spells, we can dig through our deck so fast that we can be playing Treasure Cruise after Treasure Cruise, like turn after turn in Standard for 1 mana. And that's such a powerful effect. Like, that's what we're aiming to do in some Legacy decks, which is obviously a format full of much more powerful effects, but in a deck like this, you get to do that in Standard, turn after turn. Just cast Treasure Cruise for 1 mana and draw 3 cards. And, like, when you get to that point of the game, it's very hard to lose when you're playing with 3 more cards every turn, because obviously your opponent is playing with, you know, their draw step. Maybe they're playing a dig through time after playing all those spells to put them in the yard. You're playing a couple spells, looting for each one, and then just treasure cruising. And all while doing that, you're just pumping your guys up because you have Jeskai Ascendancy. And it just makes it very easy to just go completely over any other deck in the format. This deck can struggle with big bodies, which is why Chandra's there. But one of the cooler things with the deck is, like, you have these horde of, like, very, very low investment creatures. So even though your opponent has a Siege Rhino, like, you know, our play was Raise the Alarm Hordling Outburst. So even though they're blocking or they can be attacking into us, and yes, they gain the life on the Enter the Battlefield trigger, but, like, them dealing with our creatures one by one is so inefficient. And when we start buffing them with Ascendancy or Charm, like, they're losing the battle every time. They're making poor trades, even if they're, you know, just killing a token for free. Like, they aren't effectively dealing with anything. And I think that's what makes this deck so strong in the current environment. Against the mid-range decks, like, they can't effectively just block you. Yes, they can play Doomwake Giant, which is the biggest, most crippling thing they can do in the format right now. But other than that, like, main board, most decks don't play a ton to really deal with this. And even Doomwake Giant doesn't kill Goblin Rabblemaster. Like, you have plenty of ways to play against Doomwake Giant decks without losing. So, I think this deck is very strong for a lot of reasons, like I said, and being able to beat those decks, being able to beat aggro. Your game against control is pretty strong too. You can play very aggressively. Like, playing Seeker into Hordling Outburst, attack for 3, you have a ton of pressure on the board still. If you play Ascendancy and start playing spells, like, all of your very low investment creatures are very, very, like, key removal targets. And decks like Blue-Black Control don't have that many great ways to deal with your whole board. Drown Sorrow would hurt, but I mean, again, you spent 2 cards on those. That's not that big of an investment. You can keep going. You play Treasure Cruise to refuel. So, I think the main board is basically perfect. Magma Jet is a card I would consider playing. You could maybe play another Jeskai Charm. But by and large, this deck is incredible, and I think it was a really, really impressive build. I'm going to go over the lands too, just so you guys have the whole list in front of you to look at. But there's some room in the mana, I think, for tweaks. I'm not sure his mana base was perfect. I personally would like to play like a 1 of Mana Confluence. But that's really the only other difference I would have. There's 4 Mystic Monasteries, 4 Temple of Triumph, 3 Shivan Reef, 2 Temple of Epiphany, 3 Battlefield Forge, 3 Flooded Strand, the basics to go with it, an island and 2 plains, and then 2 mountains because the deck is so red focused. I could definitely see playing Mana Confluence in here, maybe playing more reefs, but the mana as is works pretty well. You do have access to enough blue sources, you have access to enough white sources, you have to play all these mountains because red is so important to get to, and you obviously don't want to play too many pain lands, even though you do have the Seekers to help gain that life back. But the deck just flows very well. If any of you have experience playing the deck and want to talk about it down below, I'd be more than happy to discuss it with you. I do think it's the strongest deck right now, or maybe if not the strongest, it is definitely my favorite. The matchups across the board are pretty favorable. You're fast enough to beat the Hornet Queen decks before they start Hornet Queening. You're resilient enough to beat the aggro decks before they Zerg you down. And the mid-range decks, like I said a minute ago, you can play every phase of the game pretty well against it. You can go over top of them, you can beat them down quick. It's just a very hard deck to deal with. Stoke the Flames is one of the coolest cards in the format, and playing it with Jeskai Ascendancy really, really made me realize just how strong both those cards are. The fact that Jeskai Ascendancy has made combo a thing in Standard, seeing play in a deck like this, you can play it in the, basically still a combo deck, but the really aggressive like Jeskai Heroic decks. Like, it's just such a sick card, and I feel like that was a pretty big, like, design error. I'm sure when they were sitting at WotC HQ making that card, they weren't like, This is the most degenerate card we've printed in a while. People are going to cash Treasure Cruise after Treasure Cruise in Standard. People are going to kill their opponents on turn 4. I don't think they realized what they were getting into with that one, and it's a lot of fun to play. So I think while it's in Standard, we should all have fun playing with one of the more broken cards they've let us have. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you guys like this deck as much as I do.